It's 2011 and Valve is worth over $3 billion and controls 75% of PC game sales through Steam. But when the platform they've built their entire empire on decides to build their own app store, Valve's existence could be gone with the snap of Microsoft's fingers, leaving Gabe Newell no choice but to enter the living room. Dominated by PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, what could he possibly do? Well, how about pouring millions into creating a new gaming universe with a new operating system, console, and controller, all in an effort to bring PC gaming to the living room, protect Valve from Windows, and dethrone the console titans? This is how Gabe and Valve engineered the perfect console killer that couldn't possibly fail, how he turned a disaster into a new billion-dollar product, and how failure is only failure if you stop trying.
Hi, my name is Gabe Newell.
And we want to create better game experiences.
Valve has set a new bar,
pushing the industry forward.
Steam is unparalleled.
There was this war. We should have failed.
Oh my god. Definitely a step forward.
This is the future of gaming.
For you to understand just how big this threat was, we have to go back all the way to 1983 to Gabe Newell's Catalyst event. See, Gabe was a 21-year-old Harvard student who was hoping to become a doctor, because he didn't really see programming as anything more than a hobby. But one day, he flew across the country to Seattle and visited his brother who worked at Microsoft. And on that same day, as he was lurking around the offices and distracting his brother, he ran into Steve Ballmer, Bill Gates' right-hand man. And Steve utters the words that would change Gabe's entire life trajectory. If you're going to be hanging out here, why don't you do something useful? Annoyingly, Gabe starts helping his brother on programming projects, but a couple hours turns into days and then into weeks. Gabe's passion for his once hobby of programming was growing stronger and stronger, so much so that he dropped out of Harvard that same year in '83 to work at Microsoft. As the years went by, he would go on to join the core team that created Windows 1.0, which initially flopped because the software was too advanced for current hardware. But through iteration, by 1990, it would turn into Windows 3.0, and consumers finally came around, helping Microsoft hit over $1 billion in revenue that year for the first time. He would also go on to create Microsoft's multimedia division, and slowly but surely was recognized as an emerging force in the tech space. However, as the years went on, Gabe was noticing something dangerous about how Microsoft ran things, but it was too late for them to change because of the highly anticipated release of Windows 95 just around the corner, bolstered by a record-breaking $300 million marketing budget. See, when Windows 95 released, Gabe took a good hard look at Microsoft's distribution process and realized that the only way to get Windows 95 was a physical copy sold through a store, and he wondered if there was a better way. All of a sudden, Gabe has a life-altering epiphany as he remembers a small game studio out in Texas was pulling off a miracle using an incredible strategy to sell a little game called Doom. But before that, I want to tell you about another ambitious game studio that refused to hold back. See, Gaijin Entertainment set out to create the best combat game fueled by their passion for aviation, history, and military hardware. And the result was War Thunder, a free-to-play multiplayer action game at an epic scale. See, to hit the kind of scale they envisioned, they couldn't just use the most popular machines. So they researched and modeled over 2,500 ground vehicles, aircraft, and naval ships from the mid-20th century all the way to the modern era. Each one is customizable with unique skins and upgrades to give it an identity just like the real ones. But that wasn't enough. See, to be truly realistic, they needed a damage system that shows you instead of telling you. Shoot a track off a tank and it stops, tear off the wing and the plane nosedives. And if it existed on a battlefield, it had to exist in the game. I'm talking guided missiles, recon drones, night vision, and even nukes. But even with tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships, something was missing. See, with their recent major update called Line of Contact, the battlefield finally gets infantry, which is currently in closed beta testing. But pairing that with new vehicles like the Terminator, Ajax, Typhoon, and Super Hornet gives War Thunder a whole new level of immersion. Graphics and sound have also been improved to make the game feel even more authentic. Gaijin Entertainment finally did it, and now you can play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox using the link in the description, with new players and anyone who hasn't played in 6 months or more getting 100,000 Silver Lions, the Eagle of Valor Decorator, and more. And if you're on the go, they got you covered with War Thunder Mobile, available for free on iOS and Android. Thank you to War Thunder for supporting our channel and sponsoring this video. See, id Software, the creators of Doom, had a genius plan. They uploaded the first part of their game for free, a 2 megabyte file, onto a server at the University of Wisconsin in 1993. Day by day, more and more students started downloading and playing this free version of the game, which led to them sharing and uploading it to more servers, causing this free part of Doom to go nuclear. Then naturally, people mailed in and bought the full version of Doom. By 1995, Gabe realized more people had Doom on their PCs than Windows 95. Because Microsoft was bottlenecked by how fast they could ship physical products to stores. And while that 2 megabyte Doom game would have taken hours to download with the primitive state of the internet at the time, this entire experience planted a powerful seed in Gabe's mind. He starts to wonder, what if you could build a platform that delivered software straight to people through the internet? No discs, no retail stores, and no middlemen. That seed was so powerful that Gabe cashed out his Microsoft stock, making him a millionaire, then left Microsoft to start a game company with his colleague Mike Harrington, who was also obsessed with video games and the inspiring work of id Software. So in 1996, Valve is officially born. They got to work on their first game, Half-Life, and almost every publisher declined to publish it since they didn't believe a couple of Microsoft boys could make a good game. But Sierra Online took a chance on them by putting up $1 million, with Mike and Gabe having to fund the rest with their own money, so they really only had one shot at this. 2 years later, after a rocky start and multiple restarts, Half-Life and the now 30-man team at Valve was ready to launch their first game in November of 1998. Half-Life became a surprise hit, selling over 200,000 copies in 2 months, and would eventually go on to sell over 9 million copies and redefine the FPS genre. But at the time, it was just a single game for Gabe. See, he didn't really know what his dream of a straight-to-consumer platform was supposed to look like, until a sequence of events unfolded that caused one of the biggest outrages in gaming history, but also sparked one of the greatest moments in gaming history. See, Half-Life's game engine was modded by the community in 1999 and turned into multiplayer games we know today as Counter-Strike and Team Fortress. These versions were officially brought in-house as official games of Valve, but over the next few years when it came to updating these games, patching bugs, and balancing weapons, Gabe saw that users had to manually find downloads across the internet, which led to confusion, frustration, and in the end, not even being able to play the game since every player needed to be on the same version. So in 2003, Gabe built an optional automatic updater for all Valve games called Steam. Millions of players would always be on the right version and never have to worry about updates again. Well, that was the vision. When it launched, players were furious. Steam was a resource hog, it was buggy, and servers would constantly get overloaded, which meant players couldn't even access their games. But Gabe witnessed the power of iteration, seeing how the overlooked Windows 1.0 eventually turned into the mega successes of Windows 3.0, 95, and the latest Windows XP. So Gabe put 100% of his effort into iterating on Steam despite the backlash, while the rest of Valve focused on their next ambitious title, Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 would release in 2004, and this time around, Steam would be required to play, forcing people to install, sign up, and activate a service just to play a game, even if you've bought a physical copy, was unheard of in 2004, especially with the internet still not being as good as it could be. And once again, Gabe and Valve would face immense customer outrage until players eventually got to play the game. Half-Life 2 was so good that it won over 30 Game of the Year awards, and people's anger and rage started to disappear. A year later in 2005, Gabe made significant improvements to stabilize back-end systems and officially opened the doors to third-party publishers. By 2011, Gabe's dream became a reality. Steam had over 40 million users, nearly 2,000 games, was more profitable per employee than Apple, Google, and Microsoft. And Steam also controlled 75% of PC game sales. But in September of 2011, Gabe witnessed something devastating that could topple his entire empire, all spearheaded by the very company he helped build.
Welcome, everyone, to the new era
of what a PC really is.
Microsoft is pretty much a cash cow.
These are the fastest PCs ever created.
It is absolutely incredible.
Microsoft just announced Windows 8. On the surface, it's just an OS update with a new interface and touch-friendly design, but buried inside is something that makes Gabe's stomach turn: the Windows Store. Anyone that upgraded to Windows 8 would have this store pre-installed, ready to sell apps the moment you boot up, and Microsoft would take 30% of every sale. See, Gabe knew exactly what this was. He'd watched Apple do it first with its App Store, where you couldn't install apps unless Apple approved them and took their cut. Now it looked like Microsoft was copying that mobile playbook and trying to bring it to the desktop. Today it's an optional store and looks harmless. Tomorrow it's the default, and maybe next year it's the only way to install software. Steam's dominant market share, 40 million users, and $3 billion valuation was all built on the open PC and dependent on Microsoft's goodwill to keep Windows open. But Microsoft had no reason to show goodwill to a competitor, so Gabe thought of an idea that was so crazy that it might actually work. Linux. The open source operating system that nobody owns. If Gabe could get Steam and all its games running on Linux, he'd have a potential escape route if Windows decided to turn into a closed system. With the looming threat of a surprise update from Windows at any time, Gabe ran into a massive issue with his Linux plan. See, Linux on desktop PCs doesn't actually solve anything, because he'd essentially be asking 40 million Steam users on Windows to wipe their drives, install a new OS, and only have access to 20% of their Steam library because most games haven't been ported to Linux. Gabe realized he needed a better plan to get Linux into households, and that's when the vision became clear. Gabe Newell would attack the living room. But that's when the real scope of this ambitious idea hit him. First, the living room was a fortress. The giants had spent decades building trust with consumers, mastering hardware, and locking down retail shelf space. Gabe would need to out-execute companies who'd been doing this longer than Steam had existed. And second, Valve's DNA worked against him. 300 employees, no managers, no deadlines, a flat structure legendary for making great games and infamous for never shipping on time. Could Gabe get Valve's relaxed culture to bend for the demanding needs of hardware manufacturing without breaking? And third, the clock was already ticking. Every day Gabe spent building his escape route was another day Microsoft could lock everyone out of Windows with one update, and the decade he'd spent building Steam could vanish overnight. See, Gabe could have waited to see if Windows 8 was actually a threat. He could have chosen a simpler route, but instead, Gabe chose the nuclear option and sets out to build 3 things the world never expected.
Some new competition on the console playing field.
A gaming machine for your living room.
Smaller than any next generation console.
This thing is going to be awesome. We are not Microsoft and Sony.
That Steam has 65 million users.
Yeah, we want to be evolving and learning.
Today we're taking the next step.
Gabe's first hurdle was coming up with an experience that rivaled popular consoles. See, the console experience was simple, smooth, and minimal, but Steam's UI was designed for a mouse and keyboard. Lucky for Gabe, his team was already onto something. See, a couple years ago, Valve noticed players plugging their PCs into TVs to play games in their living room. So to cater to this new TV user, they launched a feature on Steam called Big Picture Mode, which mimicked a console version of Steam for Windows users. Gabe saw the wave of positive feedback and added the project of turning Big Picture Mode into its own operating system to the ever-growing to-do list. But Gabe didn't even know if games could run on Linux. So the team got to work and tried porting its first test game, the massively popular Left 4 Dead 2, created by Valve themselves, and initial tests had it running at a devastating 6 frames per second. But Valve had to find a way to prove to the world that gaming could work on Linux, so with their basically infinite money pool, they put their best engineers on it and used Steam's commanding market position to convince AMD and Nvidia to create better GPU drivers for Linux. After months of essentially teaching a game that only spoke Windows how to speak Linux, Left 4 Dead 2 officially ran on Linux at an incredible 315 FPS, which was slightly higher than Windows, and more importantly, Gabe proved Linux gaming was possible. Valve released the desktop version of Steam for Linux in early 2013 and had a couple 100,000 users, but again, the users only had access to a small percentage of their games because most third-party studios didn't have the resources Valve did to port their games to Linux, and also didn't see the benefit of appealing to such a small market. But Gabe knew that the target was never hardcore PC users. See, he knew that if he could convert even a small percentage of the 260 million console users to Linux, with his next announcement, third-party studios would have no choice but to port games to Linux. And while the all-new SteamOS was being developed, Gabe was also figuring out what the actual hardware would need to look like to compete with PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. See, Gabe knew from the beginning that Valve wasn't going to become a hardware titan, since Valve was a 300-person software company competing against the staff of 100,000 plus people at Sony and Microsoft. So Gabe's plan was simple. Valve would build the software and somehow convince veteran hardware manufacturers to build the actual devices. But Gabe needed a prototype to prove to these hardware companies that getting a full-size GPU, CPU, and power supply into a small box without it overheating and sounding like a jet engine was possible. So Valve got to work on their console killer prototype. But see, the problem with cramming full-sized high-end PC components into a console-sized box is heat. Overheating would cause performance to dip, crash it entirely, and fans would be screaming louder than an F-15. So Valve created a split-chamber cooling system where the CPU, GPU, and power supply each lived in their own isolated compartment. This was all crafted into a 12x12 box under 3 inches tall, housing Nvidia's most powerful card, the GTX Titan, and Intel's flagship i7 4770 CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, a terabyte hybrid drive, and a 450-watt power supply. And compared to the soon-to-release PS4 and Xbox One, this Steam Machine prototype would be the equivalent of bringing an F1 car to a go-kart race. Gabe wanted to make sure the prototype was overkill to show hardware partners what was possible. See, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo for the most part only had one choice at a fixed price, but Gabe wanted to mimic the variety that PC gaming provides to the console market by giving consumers 14 different choices. And paired with these machines was the Steam controller. See, if Steam machines were going to work in the living room, they needed a controller that could play every game on Steam, including thousands of older titles designed for mouse and keyboard. So Valve's solution was to replace the traditional analog sticks with dual high-resolution trackpads with haptic feedback so players would have mouse-level precision with the comfort of a controller. Everything was going according to plan. Valve now had 300 prototype machines and controllers being stress-tested. They had SteamOS, which was ready for public release. They had hardware partners lined up and bought in on the vision, with price points to attract a variety of customers. And most importantly, Gabe finally had a clear way out in case Windows decides to shut its doors. In September of 2013, Valve announced SteamOS, Steam Machines, and the Steam Controller to the world. The Steam universe was expanding, and it was coming in just a year. Gabe had declared war on Windows with his weapons ready, and all that was left to do was fire. What could possibly go wrong?
What were they thinking here?
Valve cannot afford to compete with Microsoft.
We're not really sure who the Steam machines are for.
It doesn't offer anything compelling.
We screwed things up.
The Steam Machine line was losing steam.
It's January 6th, 2014. Gabe Newell takes the stage at CES to a thunderous applause. And behind him, a wall of sleek black boxes that housed 14 different visions of what a Steam machine could be. Want something affordable? iBuyPower and CyberPower have $500 boxes that match Xbox's price point. Or if you truly wanted something overkill, Falcon Northwest will happily take $6,000 of your money. But the flagship is Alienware's, a compact black cube with a glowing alien head for a power button, console-sized, living room ready, and the face of the revolution. A week later in Seattle, Valve's first ever conference was packed with over 1,200 game devs. Valve's engineers would walk developers through the process of porting, optimization, and working with OpenGL step by step. The ecosystem is coming together, and Valve even hands out 2,000 extra prototype Steam machines for free. Linux was finally getting the love it deserves. Alienware then announces their launch window is just 8 months away for September 2014. Everything is on track, the partners are aligned, the developers are on board, the vision is clear, and then came the first hit. In May of 2014, the Steam Controller, the device that was supposed to let you play every game on Steam, isn't ready. Early testers called it uncomfortably giant. The trackpads were jarring, neither as precise as a mouse or as intuitive as a thumbstick. Valve didn't want to launch without the perfect controller, so they announced a 1-year delay, which would push the official release of everything to 2015. But see, Valve wasn't the only company betting on Steam machines. Alienware, iBuyPower, CyberPC, and the rest of the partners had spent millions designing custom hardware for a 2014 holiday launch. But Alienware was in an impossible situation and had to take matters into their own hands. See, Dell, who owned Alienware, just had a buyout the year before, meaning that Dell went from a publicly traded company back to a private one by paying out nearly $25 billion to their shareholders. That's $25 billion that Dell borrowed and had to pay down fast, so they couldn't allow Alienware to sit on expensive inventory for a year and miss out on the holiday season. So just weeks after the delay was announced, Alienware's general manager made a decision that would snowball into something nobody could stop. He announced Alienware would still ship their machine during the 2014 holiday season, but instead of using SteamOS, they'd ship with Windows 8.1 and an Xbox 360 controller. The very operating system Gabe had been fighting is being used on the weapon he designed to kill it. And within months, 2 more partners followed Alienware's lead and shipped Windows machines for the 2014 holiday season. 2 other partners quietly dropped out entirely, and the rest of the hardware partners waited, hoping Valve would be ready to launch in 2015. By March of 2015, Valve was finally ready to unveil the new redesigned Steam controller. The touchscreen was gone, it had D-pad markings on the trackpad and a glowing Steam button in the center. It wasn't the radical reimagining of the controller that Valve originally had, but it was finally ready. Then Valve also announced something strange that day, the Steam Link, a $50 streaming box that lets you play games from your existing PC on your TV, which upset a lot of the hardware partners because this basically makes the Steam machine irrelevant. And just as things were approaching the finishing line, Gabe discovers Microsoft's next move. In July of 2015, Microsoft released Windows 10 as a free upgrade, and it was good. See, consumers hated Windows 8's tile interface and forced touchscreen UIs so much that Microsoft reverted everything and went back to a traditional PC look, ensuring that the Windows platform would remain an open system for developers. Gabe was silent. Not a word to the press or comments online. 3 years of work, millions of dollars, promises to partners, a new operating system, a revolutionary controller, all built to escape a threat that simply walked away. But Valve had already committed to this grand plan of Steam machines, and on November 10th, 2015, Steam machines finally arrived in stores. The PS4 and Xbox One had sold 1 million units on its first day, and the Steam machine, with no actual official data and only estimations by media outlets, was said to have sold only around 50,000 units in 7 months. But that wasn't the worst part. See, most games were designed for Windows first, and then devs ported to Linux. The ports were rushed, the drivers were neglected, the optimization that Windows games got for free simply didn't exist for Linux. Community benchmarks showed that multiple games that ran on SteamOS performed 21 to 58% worse than machines running Windows, with most games being simply unplayable. And then came the slow fade. Partners stopped making new models, updates grew less frequent, and by April of 2018, the Steam machine quietly disappeared from Steam's front page without a word from Valve. But Valve isn't like other companies. They don't see failure the way everyone else does. They see data, lessons, a blueprint of everything that went wrong, and a roadmap for how to make it right.
They're on a mission to change the industry.
Oh my gosh.
The hardware is fantastic.
This is a really powerful moment for us.
Valve is doing amazing work.
This device is incredible.
And Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft better watch out.
After the dust settled, Gabe saw the path and the pain. See, Valve couldn't rely on partners anymore, and asking developers to port games to Linux was a dead end. Even the controller iterations and the Steam Link showed Gabe what customers actually valued. So just months after quietly delisting Steam machines, Valve launched something new, a compatibility layer for SteamOS called Proton. Proton changed everything because it translated Windows DirectX to the cross-platform language Vulkan on the fly, letting Windows games run on Linux at near-native performance without developers having to port anything. The chicken and egg problem that killed Steam machines was solved, and now Valve could finally build something real. But the living room was still a fortress controlled by PlayStation and Xbox, until Valve looked a little deeper and saw what was actually happening in the market. The Nintendo Switch had sold 85 million units. People wanted portable gaming, and over 100 million Steam users were chained to their desks. So Valve quickly approached AMD with an impossible request: build a custom chip that delivers real PC gaming performance in a handheld form factor without melting or dying in 2 hours. And in 2020, AMD came back with a solution. Zen 2 CPU cores with RDNA 2 graphics, the same architecture powering the PS5 and Xbox Series X, but something you could hold in your hands. The Steam Deck was officially announced in July of 2021, and this time, Valve did everything differently. The Steam Deck would be built entirely in-house without needing 14 partners. It would have just 3 storage choices, with the most expensive being $650. Steam Deck still ran on SteamOS, but now with the Proton layer, so games wouldn't need tedious Linux ports by studios. The Steam Deck was the simple version of the approach they over-engineered a decade earlier, and on February 25th, 2022, Steam Deck shipped. By the end of that year, Valve had sold over 1.6 million units and popularized an entirely new product category, which competitors rushed to follow. And now, with trust rebuilt and lessons learned, Gabe is ready to try again. In November of 2025, Valve announced 3 new products: a redesigned Steam controller, a VR headset, and an all-new Steam machine. This time built entirely in-house. This time powered by everything they learned from their failures. The living room awaits. The Titans are watching, and only time will tell if Gabe's second attempt will succeed where his first one failed. But if history has taught us anything about Valve and Gabe, it's this: only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly.